Dr. Devin Swiner is a senior scientist in small molecule research and development at Merck & Co. She received her Bachelor of Science in Chemistry in Pittsburgh in 2016 before obtaining her PhD in 2021 University under the mentorship of Dr. Abraham Badu Tiwa. Research was focused on developing a new ionization source for mass spectrometry materials for applications in clinical diagnostics. During the matriculation of her PhD, Dr. Swiner published 7 peer-reviewed manuscripts, was 2020 Next Generation Innovator of the Year Award, and a provisional contributions to the field of ambient ionization mass spectrometry. Her role on preclinical drug product development for infectious diseases, COVID-19, tuberculosis, and HIV. She is responsible for using a robust to enable innovative and data-driven research. Outside of her scientific, Swiner is a dedicated advocate for scientists of color throughout their academic and professional. She's been an active member of the National Organization for the Professional Advancement of Engineers since her time as an undergraduate student at the University of Pittsburgh, and president during her tenure at the Ohio State University. Her commitment to mentoring represented groups in STEM was recognized by the College of Arts and Sciences when she was awarded the Susan M. Hartman Mentor in 2018. Some notable events were that she did at OSU include a 2-part coaching and mock interview event with professionals like Merck, P&G, Owens Corning, and Lubrizol. The impact has made on her career inspired Dr. Swiner to seek opportunities to bring organization and Merck. She has been working across various departments to design drugs to increase the recruitment of Black scientists to the pharmaceutical industry, both nationally and in this region. And with that, I will give it away to Dr. Swiner. Thank you.
Thanks, Maddie. Thanks, Marta, for inviting me. Thanks, everybody, for coming and spending a little bit of their afternoon with me. Excuse the fact that my camera's off. I'm currently recovering from a knee surgery. So if anyone's ever had like a very bad surgery that kind of just uproots your whole life, you don't have a lot of time for self-care. So I'm currently doing this in my bedroom. So I'm going to keep my camera off, but I'm very excited to talk to you all today about building a community on social media. So I will share my screen. Okay. Can you confirm which view you're seeing?
The correct one.
Okay, cool. Like I have my second monitor up. It's like a whole thing.
Oh, now you've switched out.
Oh no.
I see a panel with like, no, there we go. That's right.
This is right? Okay, cool. All right, so I'll keep the subtitles on for folks, and I will also give you all a pointer, but feel free to throw questions in the chat. I know we'll do a Q&A at the end, but feel free to, as I'm talking, throw questions in the chat, and then we'll have more discussion a little bit later. I didn't want to take up the bulk of this time about me talking. I would much rather answer people's questions just because I'm under the assumption that folks are here because they are passionate about this type of thing. They want to figure out ways to leverage social media. They want to figure out ways to do science communication to a broader audience. So if you all have some very specific questions that are things that I might not have thought about to give you general advice, like I've outlined in this presentation, feel free to ask. Like I tell everyone when I give a presentation, I answer pretty much anything. So no question is a bad question. And yeah, so with that, I will give you a little bit more background. Some stuff is already heard that Maddie gave in my intro, but I'm a Maryland girl. I'm from the East Coast. So I've been in Maryland forever. And then I went to Pitt for undergrad, and then I moved again to Columbus, Ohio for grad school. Then I moved again, and now I'm in New Jersey. So what's been really cool about each step of my career is that it was not what I had intended to begin with. I was supposed to go to Penn State for undergrad to do forensic chemistry. I was not supposed to get a PhD. I was supposed to get a master's in forensics, and then go straight into working for the government. And then I was supposed to do forensics, so I'm down at a pharmaceutical company. But that's like a whole topic for a different conversation. But something else that's really important to me are these people and this dog list shown on this slide. This is my partner, Bria. So I am a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And this is my puppy, Baxter. He's a toddler now, so that's been fun. But anyone that follows me on Twitter that's here has probably seen me tweet about not only my dog, but also my partner. Other things that people recognize me for, have come to see me talk about, is really my science advocacy. And that's really what the crux of this talk is going to be about. So I won't have time to talk about all three of these things, but I am founder of Mac Scientists. It's an LLC that I own with 3 other Black women in STEM that I've been friends with from high school and in college. And that was an organization or group that we put together to really just talk about our experiences. That was something that I did a lot when I was in Pitt at the beginning of my undergrad career. That kind of morphed into when I was at Pitt, being really involved with Novachet. If you're not familiar with Novachet, it's a nonprofit organization that really caters to the advancement of Black chemists and chemical engineers. And that's a fantastic organization that does so much good for so many people. There's a K-12 initiative, there's initiatives for undergraduate students, grad students, and also professionals. So it's like each time I switch in a chapter, I've been able to work with Novachet and serve that organization in the multiple capacities that I occupy. Then I also had the pleasure in 2020 of co-founding #BlackandChem. Now, this was a social media platform, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but a social media platform that we put together really to cater to Black chemists, because in the middle of the pandemic, no one was meeting in person. So the way to really talk to people, get your science out there, things like that, was through social media. And being a millennial, Twitter is something that's always been in my wheelhouse. And it's a little easier to disseminate information and to have conversation on Twitter versus something like a LinkedIn. And Facebook is something that I just don't really use anymore. So Twitter just felt like the natural progression for a lot of my advocacy work. That's what we're going to focus on today. So what's the point of this? The objective of this talk in particular is really to identify the different methods of science communication. Like, what does that mean? What are different ways we can communicate? Talk about effective examples of SciComm, and also figure out ways and identify ways that SciComm can help build online communities, because that's the method that I've used to build my online community. So first off, I want to just orient everyone. If you've heard this term, science communication, but don't necessarily have like a definition, I just like giving everybody on the same page from the beginning. So this is really the practice of informing, educating, and raising awareness of science-related topics and increasing the sense of wonder about discoveries and arguments. So it's more than just scientists talking to other people in their fields about their research, right? It's also how we're relaying that message to the general public. So I really like this image on the left-hand side here, where it's like you have all of these words kind of spread out, but you don't really know what that means. But if you put them and curate them in a clear, direct message, you can go from something that's kind of all over the place to something very distinct, succinct, and direct. So with that, there are different ways you can communicate science. So there's this one-way communication. So that's just like you're giving information out. So it's a very passive audience. So you want to think about like lectures, press releases, articles, things like that. Those are just one-way forms of communication. And that's also valuable. Two-way communication is really you creating a dialogue. You're engaging in co-creation with a group of people. So this is like workshops, Q&A sessions, things like that. And you might have all of these different folks that you're trying to engage with. Maybe you're being interviewed by a journal or a magazine. So that's a form of one-way communication. Maybe you're a teacher and you're in schools, and that's two-way communications, engaging with your students. If you're In policy, working in the government, policymakers also engage in this two-way communication, like talking to your stakeholders and figuring out what they need, and then being able to come up with solutions to those problems, and then giving that information back out to people. So there are a lot of different ways you can communicate science, whether or not it's just information, you're having a conversation, or you want people actively involved in that process. So what does this mean? Why is this important? This is important for one-way communication because you want this to be clear, informative, very easy to digest. So when you're on social media and you see like a Twitter thread, for example, or you see like a graphic, an infographic of sorts, those are ways of one-way communication. And if you see an infographic that's kind of all over the place and really busy, that has a bunch of acronyms, things you don't know, or it's not clear, it doesn't have a flow to it, then that's an example of bad science communication. You always want to make sure that it's not only informative, but your audience can actually digest what you're trying to convey. Two-way communication is always a give and take. People should feel comfortable asking you questions, and you also should feel confident in the content. So I'm never going to give a talk about NMR. I don't do NMR. I'm a mass spectrometrist. I work in pharma, so I'm really good at drug product development things now, but I will never give a talk about NMR because that's not a part of my expertise. And we'll talk about defining your expertise a little bit later. But you want to make sure that you're creating a space for people to engage in dialogue with you about the things you're communicating, because that builds trust. And building trust is one of the crux of building a community, especially in an online space. Why is this important? This is important because we're seeing a shift from traditional methods, right? Like we still, as scientists, write journal articles, we still give public talks and things like that. But now with the world at our fingertips on our phone, we're experiencing this shift into these more nuanced spaces like social media. So that means we have to really think about and change the ways that we're talking about science or talking about science-related topics. So advantages of this, of using social media, is that we reach a lot of people. It's a lot easier to disseminate information. We can find out things going on in the other side of the world. We can find out things going on in other, universities, other large industrial companies, just by a retweet. Or if you like something on your timeline, Twitter shows it to your followers. Sometimes, hey, such and such like this tweet. Maybe it's something that you're interested in. So we live in this world now of this constant overflow of information. And that's a good thing because our message can get out there faster, but it's also a bad thing because misinformation gets spread faster. Social media also isn't very forgiving. So we think about it in the context of like the COVID pandemic, right? There's lots of information out about COVID, some information that has scientific evidence to support it, some that doesn't. So you really also, while you're taking advantage of these social media spaces, really looking at things on social media with a grain of salt, because just as fast as we can disseminate good information, we also can spread bad information as well. So with the social media age, what's really cool about it, and what's also really frustrating in the same breath, I'd say, is that it's kind of hard to navigate. Like if you're new to Twitter, it is very overwhelming at first. You're like, I don't know what these hashtag things are. What's in between a retweet and I like stuff? People can go and message me in my DMs, things like that. Now Twitter has like Twitter spaces and Twitter groups and things like that. So it's really hard to navigate at first if you're just jumping in blind or you're going from something like a LinkedIn to a Twitter space. And also cancel culture can make it feel intimidating. Some people struggle sharing on social media. Like they'll go and like consume the content, but them sharing their own content is scarier because like I said earlier, social media isn't forgiving. So you say one wrong thing and people are like, take it the wrong way because you also don't have space like you have in a journal article or like you have in a public talk to really flesh out more nuanced ideas. But there are ways to be effective on social media. You want to stay in your lane of expertise. So back to my NMR example, I just won't do it because that's not my expertise. You want to engage with experts in their fields. So if I wanted to engage with people or wanted to learn more about NMR, I would go to the people that do NMR. Same with anything else. If you're not a DEI expert but want to learn more about DEI work, you would engage with experts that are already doing the work. You want to also take advantage of things like Twitter chats and ask questions. So I try to make sure that people feel, or I've built my community such that people feel okay answering one of my tweets and asking me a question, or people feel comfortable shooting me a DM because I'm more likely to answer, or because they feel like, oh, I wonder if what's Devin's perspective on this. So you want to make sure that you take advantage of those opportunities. Sometimes you'll see on Twitter these threads of questions that'll be like, hey, retweet this and add your answer, and that gets people engaged as well. Take advantage of those opportunities to kind of learn your way around social media and to just engage with folks on the platform. You also want to make sure that you do your own research and also that you're teachable. I don't know everything there is to know about mass spec. So if I want to learn more things about mass spec, or if I misspeak and someone that knows a lot more than me corrects me, then you take that and move on, right? Like, you do your own research, but also when people are giving you critiques and when people are giving you more information, be teachable in those moments and don't always be defensive. So a lot of the big like Twitter scandals, and especially in academic Twitter, happen because some people just aren't teachable, but that's hard to survive in a space so nuanced like social media. So what's really cool that has come out of the pandemic that I have been so fortunate to be a part of are these Black and X communities. And we'll talk a little bit about their inception. So if you think about the Black and X network, the first person that comes up in Black academic Twitter or Black STEM Twitter is Dr. Stephanie Page. She started this hashtag Black in STEM to highlight Black scientists. So this hashtag took off. It helped with visibility, it helped with networking, it just gave us this initial sense of community. Like, I went to University of Pittsburgh, then I went to Ohio State, both PWIs. Like, I didn't see myself in the classroom as much when I was there, but knowing that I could find people that looked like me, that shared my experiences, and some people shared similar research interests as me, that I could use a hashtag to go search, that was amazing. It was a fantastic opportunity for Black scientists across the globe to engage with other people that were also Black. What also happened with this Black in STEM hashtag was that it spiraled into so many other Black and X movements. So Black Birders Week was the first week, Black in Neuro, Black in Cancer, et cetera, that have all done fantastic work to date for their niche communities. So for example, Black in Cancer is sponsoring a postdoc fellowship, Black in Neuro's held virtual conferences, Black Birders Week has lots of opportunities for environmental chemists and things like that. And it's really been great to watch all of these Black and X movements be born and flourish. But the one that I was in charge of, or the one that I started by accident, as I like to tell people, is Black and Chem. So Black and Chem, the goal, it's now a nonprofit organization. The goal is to amplify and support scientists around the world of African diaspora in chemistry and chemistry adjacent fields. So this flyer is for last year's Black Chemist Week 2021. That I made. And I say I created this by accident is because in the crux of all, in the height of all of these Black and X movements being created, I just tweeted one day, like, hey, I'd love to do one for chemistry. And then a couple people were like, oh, this would be so great. And other groups were like, yeah, like we were trying to figure out how to do this for chemistry, but didn't know where to start. So it's really great that a bunch of junior scientists want to do these things. And Black and Chem was born just like that, just by me sending out a tweet and saying that I would love to get people that look like me in my field together to really talk about science and to talk about our careers and to help each other and serve as a resource for each other. So it's like one of my babies I like to talk about, but it's done a lot of good and it's helped a lot of people. So I'm very excited to watch the organization grow and develop as new junior scientists or new senior scientists get more involved and take over the organization and beyond, really, which is really cool. So what's really important about Black and Chem are the implications of the work that we did. So we built a community of Black folks, non-Black people of color, and ally chemists on Twitter by tweeting, cold emailing, sending DMs. So much work went into building this community or building this network of scientists. We also challenged universities, organizations, companies to change how they treated Black and non-Black people of color. We encouraged our allies to learn and be proactive in their allyship. And we also communicated not only our science, but our struggles to the general public. And in chemistry, it seemed like it was one of those things that everybody wanted to talk about, but no one wanted to be the first person to say that something was wrong. So this movement being led by junior scientists of color was really important because it was us saying like, hey, we can't do this anymore. Like there are things that are really wrong systemically that need to change. And this doesn't just affect Black folks. It affects non-Black people of color. It affects LGBTQ plus community. It affects the disabled community, etc. But we wanted to actually get the conversation going. And with the critical mass of folks that we were able to find on social media, really start challenging people to hold themselves accountable for a lot of the quote unquote lip service that I think a lot of people are used to. So what was so special about Black and Chem? We were one of the bigger movements because we had a critical mass of people. We were also able to collaborate with ACS, RSC, and lots of universities, other industrial companies, etc. But what I think made it so special was that it was a movement for us, by us. We saw ourselves in our peers for the first time on such a large scale. We were able to engage and talk science. And because at the end of the day, all of the Black students aren't DEI experts. And I think sometimes it's easy to forget that. Like, yes, me being a Black person I do have experiences that I can share. That does not mean that I'm an expert at DEI. I'm a scientist first, right? Like I was in grad school when I started Black and Chem. So I was trying to graduate. Like I was going into my last year at OSU, trying to get a job, like trying to figure out my exit strategy. So I was leading with the fact that I was a scientist because I was trying to go to the next step of my career. I just also do DEI research. So you want to make sure that like when you all are engaging with these types of communities, that you're not just going to them for for their DEI expertise. You're also talking to them about science. You're talking to them about their other interests outside of, hey, what's it like to be Black and in chemistry? Or what's it like to be Black and in neuroscience, etc. We also were able to practice a skill in a space we were inherently comfortable with. And so we were able to show up as our authentic selves. It was a judgment-free zone. We were able to help the undergrad students figure out how to talk about science. That's not something that I actively remember learning. It was one of those practice makes perfect kind of things. We were able to give undergraduate students a space to figure out what the heck an elevator speech was and how to do that effectively. We were able to help a lot of students answer that, like, well, what do I do after undergrad? Or what do I do after getting a PhD? What kind of careers are available to me outside of going into pharma or taking a tenure track faculty position? We were able to create these spaces for people that looked like us that weren't really already available to us in our current spaces that we were occupying. And that was really special and something I will always be grateful for those that supported all of the Black Chemist Weeks for the last 2 years. So we're gonna really talk about for a little while how I became quote unquote Dr. Dev, that's my moniker on Twitter, and how I use my science communication and the things that I had learned in using Black and Chem and Novachet and Max Scientist and all of these tools that I had in my tool belt to turn that into a scientific community on my social media page. The first thing that I had to do was figure out what the heck my motivation was. And for me, motivation has always been accessibility. I vividly remember what it was like not knowing that I could go to grad school and get a PhD. Like I came in knowing what Google sold me, and there was only like the one way to get to where I needed to go because my parents aren't scientists. My parents don't have PhDs, so it was like I was going in to undergrad as a chemistry major, blind completely. So for me, knowing what it was like to not really have the answer keys to the hidden curriculum, my motivation has always been for anything that I do, removing those barriers and making my knowledge accessible to people. So after that, I had to figure out what kind of platforms I was going to use for this kind of work. So Twitter is what I mainly use, but I also have a personal website that I kind of keep everything in one place. So I've had to then identify my style of communication. I do threads a whole lot. I also really love doing live Q&As with people. I love doing seminars and workshops and things like that as well. But for social media's sake, Twitter threads and live Q&A are the things that I normally do. My expertise, like I mentioned earlier, is mass spectrometry, now drug product development. So that's a new tool that I have in my tool belt, and DEIJ work. So I also, under the DEIJ type work, I also talk a lot about career development as a new young professional fresh out of a PhD, especially one that's been in the middle of a pandemic, that got her job sitting at her computer in Columbus. Like I didn't see Merck until I got there my first day. So that level of expertise now that I have, that's things that I share. But my target audience was what I had to really think about who the heck I wanted to talk to, are junior scientists. I think it's a very unique space. A lot of the things that I want to talk to students about as they're transitioning, because I knew how lonely and isolating it could be when I transitioned into my next steps. So I always target junior scientists. So that even now, when students DM me and I was like, hey, Devin, like I'm interested in like talking about grad school, or I'm interested in Merck, I'm always like, hey, shoot me an email. We'll find some time on my calendar. And as there's still things that I could still do being an industry scientist now, that I still make the time to do. Things that are like supported by my manager and things like that as well. So having that space to do this kind of work is really what's helped me continue to do this kind of work. So how did I do it? So there are 3 ways that you could do this, or 3 things that when I sat and thought about it as I was creating this talk, I had to really think like, okay, well, what's my magic formula for this? The first thing I did was audit. So I followed people in my target audience, and I also follow organizations that serve them. So if you go through the people that I follow or that follow me, it's lots of academics, and it's lots of organizations that cater to or serve junior scientists. And that's on purpose. Follow lots of professors, lots of students, because that's people that I want to talk to. Like I want to share my information with those people. So that's the first thing that I did. I also do a lot of engagement. So I reply in threads, I comment, like, retweet my followers' content. I'm always trying to like say hi to people or things like that, like on Twitter. I'm also very consistent. When Black and Kim, when I was heavily involved with Black and Kim last year and the year before, when I was putting out content constantly, I was planning and scheduling my posts. I was staying up to date with things within my expertise so I could share those things with other people. So if there are 3 things to take away from this talk, these are the 3 right here. You want to audit the folks that you're following. You want to engage with all of your followers, and you want to be consistent. And consistency does not mean like, hey, I'm going to post once a week for a year. That's unrealistic because life happens. But consistency just means you want to be thoughtful and intentional and plan out things you want to say. If you need to take a break for the summer, take a break for the summer. But you always want to operate at your capacity. And what consistency looks like, in January is very different than what consistency looks like in August. So knowing that that's how I got or built my community, here are the 4 things, and we're going to talk about each of these separately. They're the reasons that I kept my community. So the first one, authenticity. We're going to talk about consistency some more. We're also going to talk about being intentional and being flexible. So once you build this community, it's like, okay, well, what the heck do I do with them? How do I keep this critical mass of followers, or how do I keep this critical mass of engagement? These are the 4 ways that I do that. So thinking about authenticity, I talk about my life on Twitter. People know Baxter. People know where I work. People know the fact that I love Dunkin' Donuts. I don't share everything about my life, but I do share personal stories. Like I want it when people meet me in person to be like, oh my gosh, you're just like this on Twitter. And I am. I'm just like this. In any talk I give, I always make sure that the persona that I'm presenting is still me. Right? Like Dr. Dev is professional, yes, but that Dr. Dev is still Devin. And people feel that through my Twitter page. People feel that when they meet me in real life. Like, I don't want those two things to be like night and day. And people are like, oh, you're just not like this online. Like, no, I am. I'm actually like this all the time. So that's something that I always lead with, is making sure that not only am I talking about science, but I'm still using Twitter how I've always used Twitter, to talk about my life. The second thing is consistency. So I really try to post regularly. I would set monthly goals for content. I tried to post weekly. That was a lot, because like I said, I was trying to graduate. So I was like writing a thesis, interviewing, things like that, trying to move to Jersey. So I had like life things happening too at the time. But I really did try to set monthly goals and try to plan out things as far in advance as possible. And we'll talk about at the end some tools that I really like to use to do a lot of this stuff. Now what I do is I just post quarterly. I do professional development type threads now because I'm a young professional, and like things that help me get my job or things that I didn't know I needed to know, being in industry, going from academia, are things that I now talk about on social media. The next thing is intention. I maintain my community because I want to. I wanted to build a community and I wanted to keep that community. So you inherently stick with something when you actually want to do it. So that's something that's really important, that I wanted to make sure that I identified explicitly. If you want to do something, then you find ways to do it just because you have the desire to do it. So me being intentional, or me keeping the people that I have in my community, is strictly because I want to keep them there. And the last thing is that I'm flexible. So it's really cool being able to try new content out or find new ways to deliver it. I have staples, right? So I said I do threads all the time. That's my staple. But the content in those threads looks a little different now. So I try to switch it up every once in a while. So as you grow and develop, so can your content. You're not necessarily pigeonholed into this one type of thing. Like I didn't feel pigeonholed into just talking about mass spec. Now I do separations. So if I wanted to switch to talking about separations, I can, because now I'm growing and developing as a scientist. So then I can grow and develop on Twitter. So here's some strategies you can use today. I try to end all talks with something practical. So it's not all abstract, but things you can take and implement today. So here's some things that you can use. So the first thing, you want to define your motivation. So my motivation is accessibility. I want to make sure that students that look like me or that are from marginalized communities don't have the same barriers that I had. Because now I know that the barriers exist and I know the answers to the questions. I'm going to give the answer key out to as many people as humanly possible. So after you define your motivation, figure out what your expertise is. What are you okay with talking about on social media? Then figure out who you want to talk to. What kind of community are you looking to cultivate on social media? That'll help you figure out what your expertise is and the ways to deliver that expertise. And you want to start small. I'm very much the type of person that thinks she can do all of the things all of the time, but with science communication and online presence and online community building, that's really hard to do. So you want to pick one thing and start there. Share, something about how to write a good resume or how to think through a research project, things like that. Pick something and start small. And then as you're getting more and more engagement and fostering your own community, then those things can grow and develop. So here are things that I love to use in case folks are interested. Canva is how I made this presentation. I love Canva. It's fantastic templates for literally everything. I have Canva Pro. So if anyone is considering Canva Pro, I vote you just buy it because you get access to so many more things on Canva Pro. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot me a DM and we can talk about Canva. I use PowerPoint. PowerPoint was a really strong tool that I used to build figures and things like that in grad school, and that's a tool that I still use to this day. Google Docs was really helpful in planning out my threads. It's rare that I just go on Twitter and start a thread from scratch. 9 times out of 10, I have written it all out on a Google Doc, made sure that the characters fit the Twitter's limit, make sure that all the hashtags that I want are in the tweets, and I just copy and paste. That's been really helpful. If you want to go more talking about science, or you want to have content that you're posting regularly. Writing it all out in a document is really helpful. And then Linktree, if you have multiple links, so like I said, I have a Twitter page. I'm also on Instagram. I have a personal website. There are other things that I think are on my Linktree. But if you want to keep a lot of your links to things in one place, Linktree is a fantastic free resource to use. All of these are free. Canva, you have an option for a paid subscription, but for a long time, I was using the free version of Canva, and you still get a whole lot of stuff that you can use on that platform. So here are things that you can do as an ally. As an ally for folks that want to be in these communities or that want to help with up-and-coming science communicators, etc., things you want to do, you want to spread the word. Follow, retweet, like, subscribe, share content. YouTube is also a fantastic avenue for folks that want to build community. I'm not good at YouTube, but I do know fantastic Black science communicators that have fantastic YouTube content. Half the battle for folks or for finding communities or for finding resources is exposure. You also want to engage with people's content and ask them questions. You can connect them to larger platforms. So here are some of my favorites. Skype a Scientist is a fantastic resource for folks that really like talking to classrooms about the work that they do. I did a Skype a Scientist live Q&A the day before my defense, and that was the best decision I could have ever made. But you can Skype into classrooms and talk and teach them a lesson. You can do live Q&As, so that's also fantastic. My favorite Queer Chemist podcast, one of my favorite podcast interviews that I have ever done. Beck is fantastic. Geraldo is also amazing. So if you are interested in supporting Queer Chemists, then for sure follow that podcast. Dear Grad Student is also another podcast that is a fantastic resource for folks. Elena has fantastic folks on there to give their background and their expertise and to really give advice to graduate students. So those are some of my shameless plugs for folks that I can vouch for. But you want to connect people to these platforms so they can start building their communities outside of just you. And you also want to invite people to talk about their work, invite people to share their expertise, whether it's professional development, career development, whether it's science, DEIJ, any of those things. But as an ally, here are very practical things that you can do to help marginalized communities find their community. So here are my final thoughts. So back to the similar slide, there are 4 things that I want you all to think about. I want you all to build a community of diverse people. You can't grow yourself if you're only around like-minded individuals. You want to challenge your systems to be more accessible so people can join and have the same benefits that you have. You want to encourage your peers, your colleagues, and yourself to learn ways to be an active supporter for others and communicate with others using various methods. Social media is amazing if you use it the right way. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time and attention. Hopefully this was informative and was helpful. If you want to contact me, here's my email that's based off of my professional website, devinchemist.com. So you can always reach me that way, or you can follow me on Twitter at Devin_11. And I answer DMs when people tweet me. So with that, I will hand it back over to Maddie for Q&A.
Nope. Have we lost
I'm
Maddie?
so sorry, my internet is unstable, but thank you. Am I back?
Yeah, you're kind of choppy. We can barely hear you.
Do you mind taking over?
Yeah. Do you want to hop out and try coming back in? Maybe that'll help.
My Wi-Fi is gone.
Oh, it's just your Wi-Fi. Okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, but anyway, thank you so much, Devin. I think your insights are really, really fantastic. You know, I found myself taking little notes. Oh, wait, I didn't know that was a thing. So that was really great. I really, I always, you know, there's always something that that we can learn from these things. It's just right why we have them. So by all means, please send in your questions or ask your questions. If you'd like to share your face and have this be a little bit more of a dialogue. I know, Devin, you're recuperating, and I'm sorry to hear that. As someone who had knee surgery earlier this year, I understand. Anyway, love to have some dialogue around this, and send in some questions or just unmute yourself and start talking.
I guess I'll go ahead and get started. Can you all hear me? Is that all right?
Great, yeah.
Excellent. So first off, Dr. Dev, just absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate all of this stuff. So thank you for putting it all together and presenting it to us. The first question that I'm just really interested in asking is about the spaces that you're talking about. Because obviously you do a lot of work on Twitter, but I just want to know more about how do you go about creating those spaces, not just setting them up, but like, do you use other programs, other tools to like connect with people, or is it mostly just through Twitter Spaces, something like that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I always use my network's network to start anywhere. So I originally, I was on Twitter just to be on Twitter because I've always had one. So it was easy to kind of start engaging people that I already knew, that I went to school with, that I knew from grad school, things like that. And then I always took it when I was going through to like audit my followers. I looked at the people in my target audience to see who they were following. Or Twitter has an option where you can follow like certain hashtags. So that's also a really good trick to use on Twitter. So if you want your content on your timeline to be more like academically focused, like academic chatter, academic Twitter are really good hashtags to follow. And then you kind of want to follow folks that like everybody is talking to or that everybody is following. If you're in the job market, ChemJobber is amazing. ChemJobber also has like hashtags that he uses for different types of chemistry jobs. If you are interested in like industry positions, then you want to see who the main industry folks are too. Like Merck has like a very specific list of folks that are on Twitter that engage a lot of people on Twitter too. Same with like BMS or Pfizer, places like that. So you kind of want to see who people are following and the people that have like active timelines. So like you want to look for people that are like, if their last tweet was in like 2020, they might not be a good person to try to follow because they likely just aren't on Twitter really. But if you see people that are like, if you see like certain names that kind of always start popping up, those are kind of people that you want to follow. I have a public Twitter as well, and everybody can keep their Twitter private or keep their Twitter public. I get more engagement because it's public, so people are more likely to like retweet and tweet me because it's public and they have that direct access to me. So that's how I did it. I kind of just looked at who I was following and then who they were following, and then like followed specific hashtags and then followed key players in those hashtags.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
I have more questions. I just don't want to monopolize it. Okay. I figure it's a good opportunity to ask them. So one question I have too is maybe to get your perspective on it, or just how you see it. But I think to me, I see like there's two distinct Twitter styles of like almost like the overly formal style of like academic, like this is what we've done, and then there's a much more informal style of like, and I think this is kind of how you do it, where it's just like, this is my life, this is what I do, and this is what I'm passionate about. And I'm not sure which one is more appropriate for like science communication. Like, should we really just kind of show our authentic selves out there, or does it make more sense to be more reserved?
That's a great question. I have always, so I'm not going to say that I'm not professional, because I am very professional in lots of settings. I think how I wanted to look at my Twitter and the content that I was putting out, I always wanted to sound like Devin, even if it was coming from Dr. Dev. So for me, I think I value, or I'm more likely to engage with folks that I feel like I can engage with. And sometimes when you're strictly professional, it might be a barrier for folks that are like, oh wait, can I ask Jared a question? Because it's like really formal and things like that. So it really just depends on your purpose or your end goal. If your end goal is to have engagement with the people that you follow, then a more informal approach with a splash of, more reserved professional approach might be the way for you. If you really just want to be, the content you want to put out is just very, I want to give information out, I don't necessarily need the engagement back, then going more reserved and being professional is the way to go there too.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I can keep going too, unless anyone wants to chime in. The next question I have, and this, if you haven't figured this out already, obviously I'm interested in site communication as well. And I'm trying to kind of figure out who my target audience is and kind of my motivation for why I want to do all of this. But one of the things that I think is important, at least from what I'm getting, is also like more towards like the metrics of the communication. So how do you go about, determining that the content that you're putting out, what metrics do you use to say like, oh yes, this is working, or oh, this isn't working? Is it just purely based on likes or engagement? Like how do you get a metric for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. With the public profile, I don't know if private profiles, Twitter still measures metrics, but Twitter has a function where I think it's like, if you type like Twitter metrics and you sign into your Twitter, it can tell you like how many accounts you've engaged, what your top post was, what your least engaged post was, and things like that. So when I was in a space where like I was really looking for a lot of engagement because I was in the job market, so that was really good for that. I was always on the Twitter metrics page. And you also can always kind of tell like when posts are good or when posts are bad, really based off of if you don't want to go that far deep, look at your retweets, look at your shares, and kind of see how many people are engaging with the content, right? So like people can share it, but them sharing it is very different than them engaging with dialogue with you under the thread or under the tweet. So if you just, like I said, if you want the information to get out there, then like retweets would be a really good way to track that. But if you're more concerned with like, are people engaging with what I'm saying? Really try to frame the content that you're putting as open to dialogue. So like I would ask questions. I use GIFs a whole lot because I'm very visual. So in my brain, people having a picture of it just makes sense to me. So I kind of was trying things of like, okay, well, when was the right time to post? Or like, how long of a thread was too long of a thread? Do I post questions in the beginning and the end, kind of sprinkle them through the middle? So you can kind of play around with your style before you kind of get like, this is what works for me and this is what works for my audience. Because just because it works for you doesn't mean it's going to land for the people that you're trying to reach. So you do want to try a few things, but you do want to first start with whether you want engagement or whether you want shares first, and then go from there.
All right, well, thank you. I mean, I think I'll end it there, but so I appreciate that insight very much. So thank you for all of this.
No problem.
Great questions. Great questions. I actually have a question, which is, I think I know a lot of the grad students and postdocs I've talked with, I think are aware of the increasing need to be part of the science communication community, for lack of a better word, but really to be somebody who is speaking about science in these social media platforms. And one of the things that I've thought about is, how do you balance the posts and the information that you put out there vis-a-vis like the thing that pays your bills, right? So you work at Merck, obviously, and it sounds like you have a really great manager who's really supportive of all the things that you're doing. But I guess, like, how did you strike that balance? Like, how do you find that space between I have my quote day job, right, where you do all this fantastic chemistry, but also like it's a lot of work to put together social media content. So and I mean that obviously time management is a thing, and that's not necessarily what I mean in this regard, but in terms of like the push and pull of like having your employer take seriously what you're trying to do, and like maybe being mindful of like, I'm imagining a situation, I've heard this anyway, where you're kind of maybe nervous that maybe an employer might feel a certain way about something you've posted, even if it's not necessarily controversial, but like, it's like, am I allowed to say that? I don't know. Can I? Right. So there's a little bit of that. I guess I just wondered about some of the ways you've thought about that.
Yeah, so I started a lot of this when I was a grad student, and like I said, I was in the job market. So if I was gonna talk about my research, like the work that I was doing at Ohio State, I kind of wanted to make sure that it was either published already or it was in a point where it was not scoopable. You can always make sure you have that dialogue with your advisors of like, is this okay if I post it on social media? There are lots of like opportunities for like Twitter posters and things like that. So like get that vetted first before you start posting about your research. As far as any other topics, like I had the reputation at Ohio State of always pushing the envelope as far as DEI conversation. So that like just was not new. Like the stuff that I was saying on Twitter was the same stuff I was saying in meetings or like to people's faces. So it was an easier transition for me because that was always how I had been. Those are always conversations that I was having with my peers, with the chair, with whoever at the time. You also can really think about the type of things you want to talk about. Like you don't have to talk about anything that's like remotely controversial on social media if you don't want to. Like I think the good thing about science communication is that you do get to pick what you want to talk about. Even if you want to talk about research, it still can be as broad as like, so for example, I had a project where I was trying to develop a patch, like a Band-Aid essentially, to detect cystic fibrosis biomarkers. I didn't go in like the nitty-gritty details of like how I did that because I had done, threads on like my ionization source. That's what I developed in grad school. I kept it really general of like, like diagnostic testing and mass spectrometry. Like you can make things high level. Not everything has to be like super detailed, but that's also where like a professional website comes into play too. If you want more space to kind of talk about these things, websites now are really easy to make. They're really free and serve as an extended resume. So if you want a space that's not as public as Twitter, you can also look into a professional website to kind of have the dialogue, these types of dialogues that you might not want like everybody to be able to access as soon as they hop on Twitter. So yeah, that would be my advice for that.
Thank you so much for that insight. I think that's a really great points you made. Other questions? We have a little bit more time here.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I have one. Now that, of course, as soon as I start, the internet becomes unstable. But how do you manage between like a lot of what we do is, and you kind of talked about this a little bit, a lot of it's like their information, their knowledge, but like even if you make it general, what stops it kind of from being like ownership of your PI? What really identifies it as being like your personal brand and something that you can take with you as you move?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So how I framed a lot of the work that I had done in grad school. So I did method development in grad school. And method development isn't pretty. It's not overly glamorous. But the applications of a lot of the work that I did was really cool. So I tried to keep it high level of like, here's a problem that I was trying to fix and here's the punchline. But I also took it from my brand, like I said, has been accessibility, right? So a lot of people have used the mass spec before, but don't know how the heck it works. So that's the niche that I filled, right? Like, how can I explain how to use mass spec or like what the theory is behind mass spec in a way that's easy to digest? So like if you were to ask like, okay, how does a time of flight mass analyzer work? I have a thread about how a time of flight mass analyzer works. And I use an example of twins. When you give twins candy and like one twin gets really, really excited and the other twin, they might like go to sleep at the same time, right? Like there's so many different ways that like I framed mass spec because I had teaching experience and because I just really liked mass spec, that was how I was able to kind of strike that balance. Like it was still like, here's about my research, because you still don't want it to be scoopable. But if it's something that you've published already, and if your advisor is cool with you like talking about it on a public platform, then like by all means, give as many details that are, you know, already out there. So yeah.
Other questions?
I have another general one that I just like to know because I'm me. What is your favorite piece of unsolicited advice?
Oh, that I've given or that I've gotten?
Either. Anything.
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I feel like I don't give unsolicited advice. I'm trying to think of things that people have told me, like randomly. It likely has been something about Canva. So like I said, like I swear by it now, but I had no idea what the heck that was. And I feel like somebody must have told me in passing, like a better way to use, like a better version of PowerPoint, was to use Canva. And now that's something that I use like all the time. Very obsessed with it. That's the first thing that comes to mind right now, at least. But if I have a better answer for you, Maddie, I'll let you know, because now I'm going to think about that question for the rest of today. So thank you for that.
I had kind of I guess a question about how you were thinking about starting Black and Chem. And I mean, you shared your story about that, right? About how it sort of happened organically for you. But I guess I kind of wondered, your story marks an intersectionality between being Black and being a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And I wonder how you settled on focusing on the Black and Chem part, and have you ever considered doing something for that, for the community that intersects the two identities that you've shared with us? Because I imagine that those are unique spaces, right? Like that's a different, maybe not different, but certainly I guess there's aspects that are unique to that intersectionality.
Yes, that's a fantastic question. So in general, like LGBTQ plus and STEM movements are movements that already exist. So those are things, and those are also spaces that like I've also collaborated with. So like I mentioned, like my favorite Queer Chemist podcast, love them. And other opportunities like that have been things that I've taken advantage of. The beautiful thing about Black and Chem is that most of the founders are queer. So inherently in the work that we were doing for Black and Chem, it inherently served a dual purpose of serving that community as well. The Black and Chem moniker was really to kind of follow in the like Black and X movement. And then for me personally, I think I'm discriminated against more because I'm Black than because I'm queer. So that was kind of a, not if I have to pick a marginalized group kind of thing, I'll just pick the one that's worse because they're both equally as bad. But I think inherent to a lot of the things that we kept we are queer Black people lens on in a lot of the programming that we had put together for Black and Chem. So we made sure that like representation wise, there were people that were at different intersections than just being Black and being queer. We have folks that like were gender diverse. We also have folks that were disabled and things like that, people from like different places. So also for like for both Black and Chem weeks, there were always like extra hashtags. So it wasn't just Black and Chem, it was like Black and Chem, and then hashtags about like the division of chemistry you were in, and then about like your identities, and then about like where you were, whether you were grad student, undergrad, worked in government, etc. But because the bulk of us are queer, that was a lens that like we always kind of looked at, because that was just like, well, here's our general experience. So this is the community inherently that we were serving. That's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I know like I always feel like, you know, like I don't want to be like prying into your the things that you're sort of battling out in terms of how you make these decisions, right? But I just was very curious about that. So other questions? All right, well, let's go ahead and thank Dr. Devin Swiner for her time. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You did such a really great job. It was such an engaging conversation, and really the content was fantastic. And thank you for being so accessible too, for anyone who has questions and follow-ups and things like that. So we certainly know where to find you as well.